People seem to really appreciate my frequent use and personal anecdotes relating my life and work to libertarian and anarcho-capitalist ideals. And this is going to be another one of those vids. This is one that's quite unexpected. This is a topic that I have not done a video on, I don't think, ever, because I think it's so obvious that it hardly needs to be saying. That is, of course, the drug war. Situation has developed at work that has kind of brought this front and center in a way that I didn't expect. And so it's an interesting story, and I think parts of it are interesting in that they illustrate some of the dynamics that the drug war has. I don't even remember, it was several days ago, maybe 5 days ago. I'm basically a subcontractor. Our company has two units, two different groups of workers and equipment that are working in this area. We have operations in other states, but in West Virginia we have two. And we're working for the same company, and on that overarching company, I won't say their name, but they're the company that's going to own the oil wells when they're done. Or they're actually gas wells, but it's going to own the wells. They're the ones who are paying for everybody. They have lots and lots of subcontractors. They have people who bring in water, people who bring in gravel for roads, people who build fences, people who take out the trash, people who do what I do. And then, of course, the main ones are the actual drilling companies, the companies that actually own the oil derricks. These big multi-million-dollar capital investments. And the people who own the derricks are not the people who are going to own the wells. They are basically renting their services out. It's no different than if you were to hire somebody to come and drill you a water well. You don't own their drilling truck, but you do own the well. They're just working for you. Now, this is just a much bigger deal. Well, several days ago on our other unit, not the one that I was working on, and typically a unit has two guys, and each work 12-hour shifts. You just alternate between the two. In one of our other units, the other unit, there was a drug overdose. Not with our company, but with one of the actual other third-party companies, one of the companies that brings in the water, the sewage, that sort of thing. One of their workers basically came, hooked up the water for our trailer, did a few other very normal tasks that their company engages in on a daily basis. And that night he got into his truck, and the next morning he was still in there. People started to wonder. They weren't exactly sure who he was. There's people walking around on oil rigs, and it's not always evident exactly who they are. They went and woke up the guy from our company and asked him, "Does that guy work for you? Did you know who he is?" And he didn't know either. Eventually they tried to wake him up by pounding on the windows. He wouldn't wake up. They opened the doors, and he already had rigor mortis. His legs were already all messed up, and he had defecated everywhere, and it was clear that he was dead. They tried to revive him, but it didn't work. And of course, the police came out, and then the EMTs took the body out, and then they had what they call a safety stand-down. That's when there's a serious incident, the oil rigs always cease operations and assess what's been going on. Well, he had several vials, several prescription bottles in his truck, but they didn't have pills in them. They had some sort of fluid or liquid. And so they weren't sure what it was. Now, I have heard since then that it was likely a substance known as methadone, which is not something I am at all familiar with. People tell me that it's something of not a substitute, but people who are addicted to heroin will often be put onto a methadone treatment. Treatment being an interesting word because it's, addictive also. So it's not clear if this was an intended suicide or if this just accidentally happened. I tend to think it looks like it was an accidental thing. But after several hours of the safety stand-down, it was decided that everybody on the site would be drug tested. And this was done. And of the rig crew, the guys who were on the rig, 80% of them failed the drug test, mostly because they were on speed. Every one of them was fired right there on the spot, which the oil rig cannot work when 80% of its workers are fired. On the third parties, they were also all tested. And although not 80% of them failed, many of them failed mostly on marijuana. And that indeed is what happened to the gentleman from my company. he had marijuana on Mardi Gras. He's from Louisiana, and he actually thought that he would pass the test. He didn't, and so he was quote unquote run off. That is, he can't be fired because he doesn't work for the oil companies. But what they can do is say, you can't work here. You have to leave here. This isn't your site. You're only allowed your access. This is private property, and your access to this site is restricted to the decision maker, the people who own it, and they're saying that you have to go. And so he had to leave the location. They also instituted a very strict policy that they would not allow anyone onto that location without pre-screening through a drug test that actually had to be witnessed. They pulled out a contract with a medical clinic in the nearest town, of which there were several, and basically said, this is what we want done. They wanted tested for everything, and they wanted the test to be witnessed. So, of course, I got a call in the middle of the night saying that, our unit is there, it's vacant, there's nobody doing the job that we're supposed to be doing because he'd been run off, and that somebody who can pass a drug test needs to go there. Now, obviously, there was no way for me to take a drug test in the middle of the night, so I said, well, I'm just going to sleep, and tomorrow morning I'll get the drug test. I'll have no problem passing it. And so I went and got the test, and again, surprised to find out it was witnessed, so there was actually a guy in there watching me, which I didn't find particularly humiliating, but that's just me. And then I proceeded to the site, and they demanded proof, and I gave them the sheet that said I had proof. And they also, the medical clinic was calling and saying, hey, this so-and-so came in, and they're okay. So basically I was on the site, but I was the only one approved to work here, so there was no such thing as a 12-hour relief. I was basically there 24/7. And then we had two other people, new people, show up who could pass drug tests, and they were able to come the next morning. However, in the meantime, they began drug testing everybody on all the other rigs, including the original unit I've been working on. And lo and behold, they both failed. One of them has had a long experience with drug use and getting drug tested, and he drank a huge amount of water before the test, which succeeded. The test came back negative, but it was also evident that he had drank a lot of water, which made them just conclude that he was obviously trying to thwart the test. The only reason you would thwart the test is if you thought that you had drugs in your system or might have drugs in your system, which, as far as they're concerned, is essentially an admission of guilt. So he was told he had to leave the site, as was his other. So at this point, we have two units that are normally required 4 people with just 3 people, and the other 2 are pretty inexperienced, so they had to be teamed up. So I had to then immediately travel from there to here, where I am now, and I've been working here 24/7 for a couple days now. That's why my hair is not poofy, because it's become very greasy over the last several days. So it's kind of interesting. This isn't directly related to the drug war in the sense that the government is doing the testing. This is a private company doing the testing. And of course, private companies have every right to discriminate who works for them on any criteria they so choose. However, there seems to be an enormous logical problem with someone ODing on a drug called methadone and then disqualifying people for employment because sometime in the last month they smoked another drug called marijuana. As I frequently pointed out, as did others, nobody can overdose on marijuana. That's certainly not the cause of death in his case, so why then ban people for that, or speed, or for other drugs is not entirely clear, other than they are illegal. Now, the drug screening tests that I took was called the DOT, the Department of Transportation. That is a test devised by the Department of Transportation that they use and mandate for certain professions. They don't mandate it for my profession. They mandate it for people who want to be truck drivers and the like. And so the company was basically just using that as a proxy. Since drugs are illegal, I think that they have a liability issue if they don't get rid of people who can pass the sobriety test, even though it's not entirely relevant for the normal drilling operations. As it turned out, this basically stopped drilling operations. It stopped it on the site where the man died for most of the day, almost an entire day. It stopped it on the other sites for a briefer period. Also, fewer people failed the tests on the other sites. The rig crew on the site where the man died, they have a night and a day shift also, and although 80% of the day shift failed, 100% of the night shift passed, which I think is clear evidence. It's very unlikely that the day shift were all users and the night shift never do, especially if it was speed. The night people would probably use it even more. They simply were given warning, were able to do whatever was necessary to thwart the test. I don't know anything about that, but apparently it's something that can be accomplished relatively easily. A trip to Walgreens, I was told, was more than enough to do it, or apparently downing a lot of water. So I am being, of course, remunerated for this. Since I'm here for 24 instead of 12 hours, my day rate is doubled. So I'm making an awful lot of money. But the downside is I can't shower, I can't leave, I can't really relax, I can't really get a good night's rest because they're drilling all the time, which means I have to constantly be up and try and catch little naps in sections where I think it's going to be maybe an hour or two before. This is not something that I would want to continue for a very long period, but something I can do for a while. In the meantime, my boss is having to try and find someone who A, can do this job, and B, can pass a drug test, which, as it happens, is not entirely easy. He's been calling all over the country, and I mean, when this happened, he had no prospects for replacing this many people. To have essentially half your workforce invalidated, on the fly like this, like literally eliminating half your workforce, is not something that can easily be coped with. Also, kind of tangentially, this is a clear indication of restricting labor causing a rise in wages by just simply preventing half the workforce from working. The other half that can work is going to be able to demand a higher wage, and it makes perfect sense. When normally he would be paying 2 people in a 24-hour period, now he's only paying 1. That one is doing twice the work. If I were to say I want double pay, and he was to say, no, you're getting your same day rate, I would have said, well, then I'm going to work 12 hours, and then I'm going to leave, and I hope nothing goes wrong in the 12 hours that I'm not around. He basically doesn't have a choice when it comes to this, and that's why I never ask, but he always pays when these situations have arisen before, but for other reasons, family emergencies, car trouble, that sort of thing, or like a blizzard. We've had people that snowed out. Nothing even remotely on this scale. Now, the attitude of the drilling people on site, the company man, the geologists, has all been relatively conciliatory. Like, this is just something we have to do. We're sorry. Wait a few weeks, a few months, get clean, go ahead and come back. I will note, though, that the attitude of the drug testers was considerably more negative. Of course, they were curious as to what was going on. They probably are the recipients of enormous amounts of gossip when it comes to drugs. When I said that clearly whatever he died from, it wasn't marijuana. Marijuana can't kill you. Her response wasn't, yes, that's true. It was an indignant, but it's illegal, which is actually debatable in the case of many of these people, because many of these guys, including the ones from my company and even many of the drilling workers, they live in states where marijuana is legal. And so, if you smoke it and it's legal in Colorado or wherever else you happen to be, and then you travel to some other state where it's not legal, even if you don't smoke it, the fact that it's present in your system is somehow an offense, something that can get you in trouble. And she definitely had the nurse who was going to administer the test to me had a very puritanical response that it's illegal anyway. He shouldn't have been doing it, doing marijuana, that is. And I think that of all the people who I encountered during this, I mean, my boss, he's very upset about it, but he at no point is like, oh, those terrible, immoral people for doing drugs. He almost considers it surprising that any of us could pass, because he thinks it's just a normal thing. I think her indignation, it could just be her personally, but I think she has an incentive because the clinic that she works does an awful lot of business, quote unquote, doing drug tests like this. Now, it's not the only thing that they do. While I was waiting in the waiting room, there were probably half the people there for drug tests, not directly related to my situation, but just run-of-the-mill because their job requires it. and then the other half are there for other things, blood tests, basic checkups. But it's clearly a huge subsidy for them to have these drugs be illegal, and which makes the ubiquity of these tests much more common. I think they'd still exist because there are certain employers and employees, jobs and industries where it would make sense to maybe do some drug screening from time to time, even if it wasn't illegal. But that's not what most of their business is. Most of their business is because the government is mandating this, and because the government, even if your company isn't mandated to do it, since the government is the arbiter of all disputes and the government takes a dim view of drugs, then to avoid any potentialities in a dispute, you need to take precaution, which means you have to follow their lines. If you know a judge, this should be kind of analogous. If you know the only judge in your town hates gays, then it makes sense for you, even if you don't have anything against gays, to try and organize your business in a way that that's not going to come back to bite you when you have arbitration, when there's an incident. Companies like this know that. I don't want to make just tons of excuses for companies, because I think that's too much of an apologist, but they know that they're going to have disputes with third parties that are going to end up in court, very often in court run by the government, and that in that case, they have to be conforming to the morality of the government. Otherwise, they will be biased against. They will be less likely to win a decision if they're saying, we don't mind if our employees smoke marijuana, when Uncle Sam has determined that that is an evil thing that warrants a jail sentence. And of course, the other part, even though I am now making double, which is why I'm calling this video the way that I am, although I'm making a killing, the people who have been barred from working here are much poorer than I am. Both of them are relatively poor. One has just started this job, and the type of deal where he basically had to spend all of his savings just to drive here from Colorado. He probably worked for a week, and which isn't bad, but it's not enough to justify the expense of coming here. And now he is sitting at home. They're both. One of them just went home back to Louisiana. He considers this a vacation. In fact, the man on the location where the man died, he was glad to leave. He was kind of freaked out by the whole situation. He wasn't scared or anything, but he found it very, very eerie, which is quite understandable, and just assumed not be present there. Even when I showed up a day later, 2 days later, there was definitely a pall, something hanging over the area that wasn't quite, savory. And he just went home. But the other two are staying in our company house, not working. They're just hanging around, waiting to get detoxed, waiting to get positive or negative results on tests, and being allowed to return to work. So they have been barred from employment, and the financial cost to them is considerable. What they would be making, plus even more, is being accrued to me, someone who needs it far less. If you're basing your need on how much you have already. And of course, this is a very, very common symptom of the drug war, is that people who are convicted of crimes or whatever, test positive, are many hurdles to their employment are raised, and there are many jobs that categorically won't hire them. And this, of course, makes their situation much worse than it already is now. It was interesting, the oil field is so capital intensive that they have to have workers, and they will basically do anything to get them. They will pay any price, almost. That's not literally true, but they will. When you have a multi-million-dollar capital good that will lose hundreds of thousands of dollars a day if it's not working, and it requires human labor to function, then you are not opposed to shelling out lots of money to get people there. So, our boss has not even considered the idea of firing any of these people. He is just going to shift them around to other states where they haven't been debarred. He's going to get them detoxed to the maximum amount that he can. That's how he's going to play it, because he can't really afford to just train people and then get rid of them when they get caught having smoked marijuana at some point in your past. So, he isn't angry about it. He's upset that he has to deal with this huge problem. And I've had to deal with it quite literally. He's been dealing with it on the phone. I've had to show up and be here, and it's not fun. I can do it for a while. Supposedly he'll get somebody here sometime in the next 24 hours. At this point, I'm almost just saying let it go. could use a lot of money, so might as well. But I think this is. I mean, the effect on the labor market, I think, is probably just as dramatic, although not as concentrated as what's happening here in general. I mean, the effect that it has on barring certain people from work. The interesting thing is, when I was at the clinic, she was saying that many of the companies, like the companies that drive the trucks or whatever, they have to submit, they have to randomly have some of their employees submit to drug tests. And she noticed that it was always the same exact employees coming for the drug tests. So the truck driving company, even though it was supposed to be random, every month they would have the same guy. And of course, what's happening is the company knows who's going to pass the test, and that's who they send to have a random test. It's very similar with our case. We didn't send anybody to get a drug test that we didn't already know was going to pass. And there's no point. And that doesn't mean they fire all their other workers. It just means they shuffle them around the system. They work around the constraints that are placed on them, because the value of the labor is great enough that it's worth that extra little cost, that extra little effort. There's no indication that drug use was in any way making the quality of the work go down or making it more dangerous, except for the use of this methadone, which, as far as I'm aware, isn't an illegal drug. It's probably based on prescription, and I don't know the details if this guy had one or not. I don't know if he used it in conjunction with something else. But I do know that nobody who was tested was found to have methadone in their system. There is no serious allegation that anyone is going to die because of this. And so the reaction is, it's not, I can understand an overreaction. It's a very serious deal when the worker dies. And it makes sense to stop everything and just to make sure that nothing was missed. But then to go with this huge dragnet, that's completely arbitrary, and the things that they're kicking people off for can't be justified in any kind of way to prevent what happened from happening, because the drugs involved are different. They have different effects. So again, I'm not against companies that want to drug test their employees for whatever reason, but I think that the shadow of government is there because of the fact that it deems it all illegal, and the fact that at certain levels it's mandating that people be clean, so-called. So anyway, I was talking to my boss. I said, well, I'm such a boring guy, you should definitely pay me a sobriety bonus. And that will just come in the form of my double wages. So I guess this is my first drug war video. Thank you, War on Drugs. I'm going to get a big bonus because of this. It just comes at the expense of people who are poorer than me and my company and whoever we serve. They all have to pay a higher price also, and also an enormous inconvenience to everyone. And also, very interestingly, none of the precautions they are taking apparently will address what happened. Nothing they've done will prevent people from getting methadone or using it to OD. And so, this can't really even be considered preventative. It's more reflexive. It's a knee-jerk reaction, which is the common motivation for the drug war from most people. Now, I think once billions of dollars are being spent on it, you get vested interests, like the woman at the clinic, or the prison industrial complex, or most especially the police. Vested interests who then want to continue that gravy train and have a reason to do so. But most people aren't on that gravy train. Most people aren't like me, and they're not going to get thousands of dollars because of it. But what they are going to do is support it because it's a reflexive knee-jerk reaction, having a bit more reflection before acting is something that people tend not to do in politics. I think that's mostly because of rational ignorance. There's a understanding that there's not a lot of point in making a lot of effort to come to conclusions when you know that the government's not going to listen to your recommendations very much. So why not just vote or decide based on what makes you most satisfied? And in this case, I think people would many people, not all certainly, but many people would support what was going on, even though obviously it's not really helping. It's just being very costly. So anyway, I'll upload this whenever I get off, which I don't know when that will be, but hopefully at some point. And I'll talk to you all later.